Welcome to the Tibet Museum's monthly Tibet Awareness Talk series, and today indeed I'm very honored to have with us the guest speaker Dukthen La, and Dukthen will speak on the degrading human rights situation in Tibet and China's upcoming UPR cycle. So before starting this session, I would like to give a brief introduction about the guest speaker. So Dukthen Ki is a deputy secretary at the Central Tibetan Administration, and currently she heads the Tibet Advocacy section at the Department of Information and International Relations of Central Tibetan Administration. So she is also a recipient of the TSP scholarship, and Dukthen earned her MA degree in international human rights from the University of Denver, Colorado, US, and she is also the TCV alumni and pursued her BA in English and Communication and MA in Human Rights from the India. So she also worked at different Tibetan NGOs before joining the Central Tibetan Administration. So this is a brief introduction about the guest speaker. So without taking much time, I would like to request Dukla to kindly start today's presentation. Thank you.
Tashtele, and good afternoon to all those who are here. Thank you, Tinola, for the brief introduction. My name is Dukthen Ki, and I, like was mentioned, I currently work at the Department of Information and International Relations, Central Tibetan Administration. I was asked to, present in English, so I will like to speak in English for this presentation. I just wanted to make sure everyone everyone is able to understand what I'm speaking about. So the topic for this session is the degrading human rights situation in Tibet and China's upcoming UPR cycle. I will go in I will speak about the human rights violation in one part, and the UPR, what is that and how does it work, in the second part. All right. So I think it is important to visually learn and see what Tibet map looks like. The Chinese government, as they often use the so-called Tibet Autonomous Region, comprises only, when they refer to Tibet Autonomous Region, it only highlights or refers only to the part in yellow mostly. However, the traditional Tibet consists of 3 provinces, as you all may know, of Uzang, Amdo, and Kham. So Chinese government, after the occupation of Tibet, has used the divide and rule policy, wherein the Tibetan regions were later incorporated into many of Chinese provinces and counties and prefectures as well. Now that we know what comprised of Tibet and what it looks like, let's So let's talk about the human rights violations in Tibet. Many of you, I'm sure, know about the kinds of issues Tibetans are facing, especially inside Tibet. In the next slide, you will see when we talk about human rights, it comprises of freedom of religion or belief, right to culture and language, right against torture. These are just a list of a few of human rights. For example, can we go to the next thing? So because of time constraint, I thought I will speak or highlight on some of the issues that are most pressing in today's time. For example, language and cultural assimilation. The Chinese government's policy of coercion and assimilation of Tibetans has been ongoing for the last 6-7 decades. However, it has only intensified in the recent years. If I highlight a few points, the adoption and enforcement of the national common language since 2000, that has led to forming policies and laws to marginalize Tibetan language and culture has been in place. Likewise, in 2010, the focus and re-emphasize on bilingual education policy has further again sidelined the use of Tibetan language and restricted the same. And then the ethnic state-sponsored and state-encouraged ethnic mingling and intermarriage between Tibetans and non-Tibetans have also been a propaganda that the Chinese government has tried to propagate. Tibetan children, when there were lack of access to education in Tibetan, when they try to attend privately funded or private schools where Tibetans are taught, that has also been restricted. So these are a few examples, and one of the most pressing human rights violations in Tibet has been the forced the coercion of over 1 million Tibetan children who have been forced to undergo or are enrolled in the colonial boarding schools in Tibet. What happens in this colonial boarding schools is that it is the systematic and extensive alienation where Tibetan children are separated from their families. In doing so, they are then restricted the access to their own culture, language, and tradition on a daily basis, right? So as you can see on the poster here, of the over 1 million Tibetan children who have been affected through the colonial boarding schools in Tibet, these children, for them it was mandatory that they attend these schools. It is definitely a gross violation of human rights in all its senses, and it was mainly for political indoctrination. The impact that was seen in this because of the colonial boarding schools, this was actually published in a report by the Tibet Action Institute, wherein the whistleblower Dr. Gyalo, who is an educationist and activist as well now, now that he is in exile, he explains in detail what the children who are in these boarding schools go through, right? So some of the impact has been cultural assimilation, racial discrimination, the emotional and disturbingly, the sexual and psychological distress that the children, Tibetan children, are subjected to, and then the sense of loss of national identity, as well as poor living conditions. So the coercion of the Tibetan children into these state-run boarding schools, to put it in a very simple way, the whole policy seeks to eliminate Tibet's distinct linguistic, cultural, and religious tradition among younger generations of Tibet, because at one point of time there will be a generation of Tibetans who will not be able to speak Tibetan, who will not be able to identify themselves as Tibetans if they are to celebrate a religious occasion or a festival. So as someone has used this term, the whole policy is trying to kill the Tibetan in the child, So this gives us the sense of urgency and concern over why China is investing, as well as why they are trying to do this. That's helps us in understanding the why. And going to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, it is a large-scale program, contrary to the international human rights standards, where schools that uses Tibetans are replaced Tibetan as in as the medium of instruction are forced to replace their medium of instruction to Putonghua or the Chinese language. There's the the cutting children off from their parents, where they are not able to even go to their families during the school breaks, so as to prolong the separation from not only their family and relatives, but also the daily or regular access and exposure to their Tibetan culture and tradition. So the concern has been raised and shared by many at the international level, including several governments like Canada, Czech Senate, Germany, UK Parliament. Recently had a debate on this, colonial boarding schools. The US government called on China to end this policy. Likewise, the United Nations experts have also raised their concern and have called for the Chinese government to end such policies that are not only violating child rights but overall human rights as well. Other than that, there has been ban on the usage of Tibetan language in schools. Next. So in terms of religious repression and sinicization of Tibetan Buddhism, as you would have noticed over the years, one of the main focus that the Chinese government has been trying to do is to claim ownership over Tibet, the reincarnation of Tibet's spiritual leaders, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In Tibet, like you can see in the pictures here, shared here, Tibetans are forced to showcase and display pictures of Communist Party leaders on their altars, which is a holy place where usually only you would see pictures of religious or spiritual lama, such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama. But then again, finding one in possession of a portrait of even a small picture of His Holiness the Dalai Lama will land Tibetan inside Tibet in jail, right? Now it almost sounds like they are propagating a new Communist Party's religion, where they are compelling Tibetans to display pictures, including that of Xi Jinping here, to and Mao Zedong as religious freedom. So schools, homes, villages, monasteries and offices are ordered to display pictures of the CCP leaders instead of their revered spiritual leaders. And the PRC's approach to Tibetans in terms of religious freedom has been more aggressive under the Xi Jinping leadership than ever. There have been continuous reports of arrest of Tibetans, like I mentioned, for keeping or being found in possession of a picture of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Any display of reverence to His Holiness the Dalai Lama would be called a threat to national security and could land one in jail and sentenced for multiple years. This one case, so I also wanted to let you know that in this presentation I have used some of the major events and major issues, not only of most current year but over the last 5 years, and you will know why at the at little later. So in 2021 there was a huge concern over reports where Chinese authorities in Trango County started dismantling huge statue of Buddha as you can see on the top right picture, it's a 99-foot tall Buddha statue that was built in 2015, so quite recent. And it was, done so with the public, raising the funds by themselves to ward off, natural calamities that was being, they were being struck in the county. So in order to ward off such, incidents, they built this huge Buddha statue. However, and that was also built after acquiring all the approvals and permissions from the local and state officials, authorities. However, in December 2021, all of a sudden they started demolishing the Buddha statue. And when the local Tibetans started to protest and question the authorities why they are doing so, because they had gone through all the permissions and seeking approvals, then local Tibetans were then jailed and threatened with arrest. So next. Similarly, in next slide. Yeah. Similarly, in 2016, there was large-scale demolition of Larungar and Yachingar. These two are Buddhist institute. Larungar, in fact, is called as or referred to as the biggest Tibetan Buddhist institute in the world. However, in June, it actually started a few years before that, but then it was not at such a large scale. But in June 2016, almost half of the Larungar residents or Buddhist students were evicted against their own will by the Chinese officials or authorities, because they were worried that the center was gaining so much popularity and influence in the area, and there were not only Tibetan but Chinese Buddhist students as well, who would come from far and far areas to study at the institute. And this led to a few incidents of suicide by nuns in protest to the demolitions. However, the Chinese government would have another excuse or reason, right? They said it's only an attempt to avoid fire, danger in the area, and for management purpose, they said. And the evictees, they were not only banned from the Larungar and Yachingar, but also they were not allowed to join any other monasteries and nunneries in any other Tibetan Buddhist area. Regarding the Larungar demolition, the European Parliament actually passed an urgent resolution on this in 2016, expressing their concerns. Like I said, the Chinese government's response was that their justification was that it was for development, the right to development that they were pursuing in the region. And Yachingar is actually a nunnery where, again, similar number of Buddhist practitioners were evicted. And you can see in the picture, almost half of the area was razed to ground. So these are just few of the examples. Next. The picture, the collage is a little bit blurred, but if I explain, the far right would be, where the houses of the monks and nuns are, totally destroyed, and the nuns who were, witnessing such demolition, they were so, pain-stricken, and their pain was so unbearable that many of them were fainting. We received secret video clips around that time from Tibet, where you would see nuns wailing and crying because they were forced to leave their nunnery, and many of them were fainting and falling to ground. So what the attempt of the Chinese government has been is that they have been trying to have a total control over over Buddhist institutions in Tibet. How they does this is through various policies. One would be the eviction, where they will bring down the number of Buddhist nuns and monks in one specific center. However, the second one would be that the enrollment to these monasteries and nunneries would be highly politicized, and they it's there are so many restrictions when a Tibetan wants to become a monk or a nun. Apart from that, Tibetan students who are like schoolgoers, they are restricted from participating in any religious activities. So this could be as simple as going for a kora around Potala or any other significant religious sites. So this here you will see in Tibetan, where a middle school was ordered by the county officials or the office, where they say that they cannot practice or believe in religion, and they even send out notice, public notice. So next. So believing in religion is not against the law, and believing in these the notice that has been put up in public is what it says in writing or on paper, right? That it is not against the law to believe in religion. However, they do not want religion to affect the children's growth negatively, and only an atheist party or government would be able to explain what that means. When I mentioned China's continuous efforts in trying to synthesize the Tibetan Buddhism and to take control over the reincarnation of Tibetan spiritual lamas, this would be one example, the biggest example, if I may say so. The enforced disappearance of the 11th Panchen Lama. He was abducted by the Chinese government in 1995 at the age of around 5 years old, when just 2-3 days after His Holiness the Dalai Lama officially announced him as the reincarnation of the 10th Panchen Lama. Immediately 3 days later, this is the only photo actually that you would see in Dharamshala, as well as on online or websites when you refer to or when you search Kenducho Ginyima or the 11th Panchen Lama. So he, along with his parents, they were all taken away to an unknown location. Till this date, we have no information about Panchen Lama's status, not even whether he is alive or not. What the Chinese government has, given or explained to the world, because there have been repeated questions, or where through the United Nations, or where foreign governments have tried to inquire the status of the Panchen Lama and their whereabouts. The Chinese government always would respond saying like, that he's in good health and there's no need for interference in his private life. The most recent unverifiable information was that he received education and that he is now employed. However, the Chinese government has not even released a picture of to prove that he is fine, or he has that he is working and received all the education that the Chinese government keeps on pointing, pressing to the world. Now this is one example of the misuse of religion for political motives, and you might have heard about especially in these in the recent times, Sinicization of Tibetan Buddhist reincarnation by the Chinese government, and of course we know why they are trying to do it now, again after the Panchen Lama. Next. So yeah, thank you. So to give some more details about how China is trying to interfere in Tibetan Buddhist reincarnation system, the order number 19 is a very recent one, just few months ago, where in July 2023, where the Chinese government published this order and said like, this order mainly is an escalation of the ongoing crackdown on religious freedom. So earlier in 2017 there was order number 5 that sort of is as a compulsory rule where reincarnated lamas has to register online and they need to be approved by the state. So this order number 19 is a step ahead, more restriction on that, adding more restriction in the sense that now not only the religious figures have to be approved by the state, and we can of course understand who will be approved, only those who will listen to all the demands of the Chinese government, right? Otherwise it will be very difficult to get that approval, so-called approval. And this order number 19, what it says is that now the religious centers such as Buddhist temples, monasteries, mosques and churches, all of them have to obtain official permission to carry out any sort of religious activities. Now the centers or temples that are specifically founded to carry out religious activities have to first get the official permission to do so. And there's a specific emphasis on in this order number 19 where they say that in doing or in carrying out these religious activities, they have to keep the Chinese nationalism at heart, and strive to create ethnic unity and should be loyal supporter of the CCP. So this is all like politicizing religious as well as controlling religious activities in all kinds of areas. In this regard, the United Nations, a group of UN experts sent a communication sort of like a official letter to the Chinese government in June 2020, where they said that the CCP's interference and is possibly undermining the discriminatory way the religious traditions and practices of the Buddhist minority. So they were referring to the interference in the reincarnation and interference in Tibetan Buddhism, and they specifically mentioned that there is a fear that Chinese authority will identify and appoint the successor of the current Dalai Lama. So now you can see where the whole plan of the CCP's policy and why they are interfering in Tibetan Buddhism is going in which direction. It is clear from that. One of the most concerning issue is, the wave of self-immolation protests that has taken place in Tibet since 2009. It is true that in recent years, the number of self-immolation protests have decreased, which not only the Central Tibetan administration but Tibetans around the world have been requesting Tibetans to honor their lives, even though we understand the difficulty of living every day under such a repressed condition under the Chinese government. However, that does not mean that situation inside, the decreasing number of self-immolations, or for that matter, the information of, arrest and sentencing of Tibetans that are much lesser than what we used to see in 5-10 years ago. It doesn't mean that situation in Tibet is getting better. In fact, it's the total opposite, where the situation is becoming so scary and so restrictive that it's almost impossible for Tibetans inside Tibet to send out information on a particular arrest or on a particular incident of human rights violation inside Tibet. Whether it is cybersecurity laws or there are so many restrictions online as well as out in the world or out of their homes in Tibet, that the communication, receiving or sending information to Tibet and out of Tibet has become extremely difficult as well as extremely risky. As for the self-immolation protests, since 2019, at least 157 Tibetans have burned themselves alive in protest of the Chinese repression. Two of the most common call of these Tibetans have been for the return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Tibet and for freedom in Tibet. As the self-immolation protest started to catch fire or spread out and became more frequent, what the Chinese government started to do was they don't only persecute those who try to self-immolate or who are arrested after after a self-immolation protest, but they also criminalize their act, and they also crack down on the family, the relatives, and even the whole village to where the self-immolator belongs. So next is, you might have seen these pictures in going around Kora, where they have displayed all the pictures of the self-immolators inside Tibet. So there are so many examples to share, but I will only go to the most recent Tibetan self-immolation protests. In 2022, there were 2 cases of Tibetan self-immolation. One was Tsewang Nobu, who is the one in the middle, and the other is the one with glasses. His name was Dukthen. He was 81 years old when he self-immolated in March 2022. The first one with the cap is the father of Tsewang Nobu. Tsewang Nobu was a 25-year-old rising star singing. He was a very popular singer, and his popularity was only growing when he committed the self-immolation, and his father, the one with the cap in the first picture, he committed suicide a few months after Tsawon Nobu's self-immolation, because the Chinese police would harass and threaten his family repeatedly after Tsawon Nobu's self-immolation. So even after, the person is dead, they do not let the family grieve or live. So that is an example. So now with that, I will that's the first part where I wanted to give a gist about the human rights situation and the deteriorating situation inside Tibet. The second part of my presentation is about the Universal Periodic Review, or for short we call UPR. So if you say, when some of you may know what is the UPR, but I will give a very brief explanation. What is the UPR? Does anyone have any idea? Anyone already know about UPR? Just a show of hands, so that I will have some understanding of. Okay, so I will go to the basics. UPR is a process or a mechanism of the United Nations, where every single 193 member states of the United Nations has to undergo a review, as it says in the name, Universal Periodic Review. So no one can be exempted from this review. This review comes only once in 5 years. So that is why it's very important when we, not only the CTA, but many of the Tibetan NGOs as well as Tibet support groups around this time will be very busy, to highlight, very busy working on how to highlight Tibet at the upcoming UPR. So who participates in the UPR? UPR is mainly where the United Nations High, Human Rights Commission will have representatives, official representatives from one particular state and member state. So in this case, China will be undergoing its fourth cycle of UPR on 23rd January. So it's almost like a couple weeks, less than 2 weeks, right? So the representatives will then come to the UN, and then the member states will speak about how China has, go through China's human rights records in the past, in the last 5 years. So because it's done every 5 years, the last one was done in 2018, around end of 2018, November to be specific. So it will be after, from December 2018 till date. So they will undergo the human rights record. So not only this state and UN officials will be present there, but it's also an opportunity for stakeholders and activists, including activists, research centers, even victims of human rights violations, who can participate and observe the UPR session. When is, like I said, it happens almost every 5 years. And then why? Now this process is very important because there are many other UN mechanisms where similar review could be done for one particular member state. For example, we have treaty-based committee and reviews, such as for example, I can think of committee on the rights of child can have a review under their mandate. Committee Against Torture can have a review of one particular state and how they have been dealing with prohibiting torture in their region. So likewise, there are thematic mandates as well as specific other reviews that could be done at the United Nations. But then, those are not as regular as the UPR, in the sense sometimes when the committee summons or calls the particular member state, for example China in this case, for the review of the convention against torture, even if China refused to come, there is not much that they can be done. However, the UPR is very regular where countries have to undergo this review. And again, the advantage is that for other review, you have to stick with whatever that mandate particularly calls on, or whatever that review is, right? For example, if it's a review of the Convention Against Torture, you cannot speak about something else other than torture, right? However, during the UPR session, it's anything related to human rights violations. So that gives a bigger space and opportunity for stakeholders to raise concerns during this process. So to give you some ideas about the past UPRs, there's a system, something like countries can raise advanced questions on particular region to the member state that will be undergoing their universal periodic review, or they can raise specific recommendations during the UPR. So in case of Tibet, there was several questions that advanced questions that were raised. I've listed the countries here for example, and in 2018, like I mentioned, that was the most recent, the third UPR, China's UPR cycle. So the recommendations are when the exact review is happening, and then a state will mention or share their concerns and recommend for a change or something to the member state. So in 2018, the first one was the advanced question. Next, so these are the specific recommendations that were Tibet related, that were raised during the UPR cycle. However, China failed again and again in implementing the 2018 UPR recommendations. Now, when a country or other member states recommend something, it is expected that how the other responding member state respond would be that either they will accept the recommendation or they will reject it. These are some of the recommendations that the Chinese government either would have said, like, we already implement religious freedom in Tibet, so they will just deny it or reject it. In the next box we have here is just an overview of the 3 UPR cycles that China has undergone at the United Nations, and a total of 16-17 member states have raised Tibet at China's UPR cycles. So this is just to give you an idea of like who would raise Tibet at the UN when China is being reviewed. Okay, now moving to 2024, like I mentioned, on 23rd, there are several states that will undergo the UPR in one session. So on 22nd actually is when the whole UPR review will start, but China will be it's scheduled to have its review on 23rd, and the Central Tibetan Administration has submitted a like written submission to the UN, where we had made recommendations calling for China to respect the human rights of Tibetans inside Tibet, and some of these are listed here. Likewise, there are many other stakeholders such as NGOs and research centers, including Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy, Tibet Watch, International Campaign for Tibet, Student for Free Tibet also submits UPR written submission. So these are done. For example, in this case, China's review is scheduled for January 2024, right? But the written submissions has to be submitted within a specific deadline, so which was around mid of July last year. So what the committee will do, Human Rights Committee will do, is that they will go through all these reports and then have an observation report, which they will then submit to, or send to China, and seek their response on those. And then the Chinese government has to submit their national report, which was due in October 2023, but till now I haven't been able to find it publicly online, so I'm not sure if it should be it should have been submitted. So what they sometimes try to do is they submit it late, so that stakeholders will not have that much time to go through what they have written and then respond to the national report. Next slide, please. So when you see Tibetans highlighting human rights violation in Tibet and advocating for human rights in Tibet, and this is done through all the collaboration of not just the CTA but also Tibetan NGOs, even individuals around the world, where the call for improvement of human rights situation in Tibet is demanded at the international level. Now what that has resulted is, I have just an example of how the UN committees and UN human rights experts have responded to these news or these reports on deteriorating human rights situation inside Tibet, right? So here you can see number of communications that the United Nations have sent to China officially. These are on various issues, including the arbitrary detention and imprisonment of Tibetans, enforced disappearance, even the policy of acculturation and assimilation of the Tibetan culture, like I mentioned in case of the Colonial boarding school, continued disappearance of the 11th Panchen Lama, arbitrary arrest of human rights defenders, and even detention of those who were arrested because they celebrated His Holiness 80th birthday in 2015. So these communications were sent to China asking what is the status, like why has these been done, like why they have arrested these Tibetans, and what the UN experts try to do is to seek answer from the Chinese government on particular cases. So so I'm at the last slide of my presentation, and this is just to give you an overview of or a review of the human rights situation in Tibet in 2023. Tibet has yet again been named as the least free country in the world. This is the third consecutive year. There have been repeated, reports of Tibetans being arrested, arbitrarily detained. At least 40 Tibetans were reportedly reported to be known to have been arrested. And we say reported because we believe that there are several more. Numbers would be much higher where those where arrests have been remained unreported. Like I mentioned, to give a very quick summary, that one of the biggest concerning issue have been the 1 million Tibetan school-going children who were forced to undergo the Chinese colonial boarding schools. Till date, over 2 million Tibetan nomads and farmers are forcibly relocated. And there was also the report of over 1.2 million Tibetans, including kindergarten students, who were subjected to arbitrary mass collection of DNA samples as a tool of surveillance. And as I mentioned earlier, at least 157 Tibetans have self-immolated in Tibet since 2009, which gives us a picture of how living life day by day in Tibet would be so miserable. It would be so difficult under repressive policies of Chinese government. So what we do at the Central Tibetan Administration is to reach out to officials of various countries, whether in Delhi or where you have the embassies, or in Geneva, meeting the member states based there, to ask them and to not only inform them about what's happening inside Tibet and giving them recent information, but also asking them to mention Tibet and to call out on China for its ongoing gross human rights violations in Tibet. So we are yet to see how the China's fourth UPR cycle will go, and what would be the recommendations that member states would raise with the Chinese government. But it's something that has to be on our watch list for 2024. So with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you for your time. Yeah.
So with this, we have come to the end of today's talk series, and I would like to thank our speaker for the very informative presentation on the topic, and also I would like to thank for the audience for your valuable time, and thank you so much.